Hello, everyone. Welcome to Chapters. I'm your host, Amy Deal, and I'm very excited for this episode. I'm going to be speaking with Ron Fassler. He is a recovering actor and now is writing some great books. Although, do I have to mention that his acting credits include NYPD Blue, Ally McBeal, Star Trek Voyager, and my favorite of his roles, Captain Grazer in the television series Alien Nation. Welcome to the show, Ron.
Well, thank you. And thank you for remembering Alienation because that was 36 years ago. So,
Yes.
yeah, time
It's
marches on.
Yes, I still watch it. It's most of the storylines are still relevant today.
Well, yeah, that show was
Sadly.
definitely a bit ahead of its
Yep.
time. And,
Yep.
for any of your viewers or listeners, it was basically a prestige hit. We got very good reviews, but we were on the Fox network in only its like second or third year of operation.
Hmm.
And they pulled the plug on us after a year, and we had so many stories to tell. And sci-fi fans are incredible, and they just kept writing to Fox, get
Hmm.
Alienation back on the air. And we eventually did 5 additional 2-hour movies.
Right.
Just great to get the old gang back together again.
Yeah.
And we're all still personal friends, and we see each other, and we have reunions, and it's kind of amazing. I mean, my son was born during episode 5, so that's why I
Oh,
always know how old the series is. It's as old as my eldest child.
right. The cast was just such a great ensemble, I thought. You all meshed so well and you acted so well together, and it's just great to hear that you all are still close after
Yep, very
all
much
these
so.
years. Now,
Yeah, those are rare.
I was friends with Gary Graham,
Ah, yeah.
and so that was so sad for me, and I'm sure for you too when he
Yeah,
passed.
yeah. Gary passed just last year, and
Yeah.
it was very sad. We've said goodbye to a few people on that show. Our director of photography, our production manager. I mean, none of us get any younger, but yet we
No.
live on in reruns.
Yeah, that's true. We can
That's
see
true.
Gary anytime we want.
That's right.
All right, so let's talk about your book, The Show Goes On.
Certainly, here it is. It's called The Show Goes On. It's got these wonderful little caricatures of famous Broadway types on it. The book
Hmm.
is filled with stories because its subtitle is The Show Goes On Broadway Hirings, Firings, and Replacements. And it
Ah,
tells the stories of what happens when an actor leaves a show. They have
hmm.
to be replaced. And
Sure.
how do you replace someone who has been defined by their Tony Award and all their reviews as irreplaceable? And what happens to business? And how do you re-advertise it? How do you keep a long show running? Also, what happens when an actor is out of town with a play and you're in Boston and all of a sudden everyone realizes they're not working out and you got to fly an actor in, sometimes secretly hide them in the theater with sunglasses, so no one knows that the lead actor is being replaced. And then that actor has to take over, jump on a moving train and get that show into the shape it needs in order to succeed on Broadway. And some of these stories I tell, they're downright heroic,
Mhm.
especially when I go into the chapters on understudies and standbys and swings. For those in your audience that don't know, when someone is sick, the understudy takes over. The standby is generally someone not in the show, but is just hired outside, and they just come in and do the show. An understudy is usually playing a small part and then moves up to the big part. And then the swing is always in a musical. And these are the people who have to learn every single dancer track on the stage. Let's say there's 15 dancers, and you've got maybe 3 or 4 swings who are going to cover every time one of those dancers is out. And they got to slip into that dancer's position and raise
Mm.
their arm on that note. When the other night, when they were on for the other guy, they had to raise their arm on that note. I don't know how they do it. I mean,
No.
frankly, it's just not the way my mind can process information. And there are stories in this book they're mind-boggling. I mean, when the big revival of The Music Man recently was on Broadway with Hugh Jackman and Sutton
Mm.
Foster, they gave like the first 1 or 2 previews, and everybody was so excited, and they were completely sold out. And Sutton Foster got COVID, and this was like day 3, and the understudy had never had a rehearsal. She was
Oh,
in the chorus. She knew the part. She did her job, even though no one rehearsed her. She was watching carefully every move Sutton Foster made. She knew the lines. She knew the songs. And she went on that afternoon. She had maybe like 2 hours to get it together and did it flawlessly. And at the curtain call, Hugh Jackman pulled her out while the audience was cheering. And he made this speech about how absolutely gobsmacked he was by what she accomplished. And she has a name, by the way. Her name was Kathy Voico. And he praised her and then praised in general understudies and called them the bedrock of Broadway. And that little somebody was in the theater filming it. So, of course, that went viral and millions
Yes.
of people watched this. And there became this incredible surge of interest in understudies. Articles started being being written about them. And because of COVID, there were so many situations where, you'd open up your playbill, and usually there's that one little piece of paper at this role, at this performance, the role of.
Hmm.
By well, you would open up the playbill during COVID, and these papers would fall out like so much confetti.
Like infinity. Yeah.
It would snow on you. There was one show called A Beautiful Noise that was the Neil Diamond musical. One afternoon, 15 cast members were out sick. Now, ordinarily, you'd have to just send everybody home, but they didn't want to do that. And so they recruited everybody they could find. They called the assistant director who hadn't acted since college and had him rush to the theater and go on stage with the book in his hand just to keep the audiences in their seats and, not take the loss of sending
Yeah.
everyone home for that
Keep the lights on at the theater. Yeah.
Exactly. So I love these stories. I mean, I've been collecting theater stories my whole life. I've been a devoted theater goer for over 50 years. I am now a theater critic, which allows me to go to the theater all the time. Next week, I am going on Tuesday night, Wednesday afternoon, and Wednesday evening, Thursday afternoon and Thursday evening, Friday night, Saturday, and Sunday. Now, that's not a typical week for me, but it's not an unheard of week. So I love it. People, friends say to me, how do you not get jaded? How do you not get bored, tired? And I can't. It's just whenever I walk in a theater, there's something about it that thrills me. The potential to see something live that is going to be memorable and unpredictable and possibly transformative takes over. Sometimes critics get a bad rap. Oh, they just come with their arms folded and they're like, prove it to me, you've got it, right? Well, that's not me. I mean, I go to the theater like this, like, oh, give it to me, please. And also praying it's good. I don't want to see a bad show. Why would I
No,
sit there? I can't write a bad review because it's so much fun to write bad reviews.
exactly.
It's not fun. It's actually quite painful. And I try not to, even if something I really don't like, I try to find something I can recommend about it. But then again, I got to be honest. And with the current price of theater tickets, I can't in good conscience recommend something that isn't worth the price of admission.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Mm. So tell me about, where did your love of the theater, like when did it begin and how did it begin?
Well, it's funny. My love of theater began with a movie.
Hmm?
At 5 years old, I went to see Robert Preston in the Music Man, which was in 1962. That was recreating his great Broadway success of 1958. And he just changed my life. I wanted to be Robert Preston.
Mhm.
I wanted to be the guy that could walk into a town and get everybody marching in a parade. I wanted to be a leader, and he became my touchstone. I wanted to see everything he did. And so when I found out he was, also doing plays after The Music Man, I kept begging my parents, oh, he's in a new Broadway musical, please take me. And like, you're too young. I'm like, I'll be the best behaved 7-year-old that ever went to the theater. Please take me. But they didn't. And it wasn't until he was appearing in a show co-starring with Mary Martin. It was a
Oh,
two-character musical called I Do, I Do, about the history of a marriage. And, the chance for a 10-year-old to see Peter Pan and the Music Man in the same musical. I mean, I was begging, but I had a great aunt, and my great aunt Helen knew what it would mean to me, and she got me a ticket. And the two of us went to see I Do, I Do. And that was it. I was hooked from my first Broadway show. All I wanted to do was see more. So by the time I was about 12, I had a paper route. Remember when they used to give little boys paper
oh
route?
yes. Hmm.
And I made about $11 a week on my paper route. And believe it or not, in that day, and we're talking about, 55 years ago, I would be able to go into Manhattan from my home on Long Island. It was only a 25-minute train ride. And I would be able to buy a ticket to a Broadway show, buy my lunch, buy a copy of Variety so I could keep up on everything that's going on. And all of that came to about $11. The average cost to sit in the last row of a Broadway theater in 1970 was $3.
Wow.
That's all it cost. That's all it cost. So I sat up in the cheap seats, which is the title of my first book, which is a
Uh-huh.
memoir about my time going to the theater. Because during those formative years between the ages of 12 and 16, during a 4-year span, I saw 200 Broadway shows. Can
Wow.
you believe it? They used to bring like
That's
60 shows in a season in those days, and they were all affordable. And I was such a precocious kid. I used to go backstage and meet all the actors. It was nothing like it is today.
mm,
Nothing like people waiting in what they call stage dooring. It's a thing.
right.
And because everybody has a camera, they all want pictures. Who carried a camera on them unless you were a professional, photographer. And
Exactly.
and also there was no such thing as eBay. People now they resell the autographs. It's
Uh-huh.
become like an industry. In the old days, a show would end and there'd be 4 or 5 people by the stage door. But I was this little cute kid. I would just knock on the door and demand to see Henry Fonda.
Uh-huh.
And they'd go,
Uh-huh.
oh, third door on the left. And suddenly I'd be
And
knocking on
just there.
the stage door and he'd let me in. And so often these people were so enchanted by this little 12-year-old, 13-year-old, they would invite me in and I'd sit down and we'd chat. And I mean, I just can't begin to tell you what an experience it was. And also for someone who wanted to be an actor, I was getting an education that, no college could give you.
Mm-mm. No,
I
real
mean,
world experience.
I saw all these shows. I made up my own mind about them very often. I saw them in previews before they opened. I'd come home and tell my parents, I'd say, you just wait. This show's going to win all the Tonys. And of course it would. And it was so funny. Here I had parents who did like theater and all that. And they never took me. Not once did they ever take me. But I would take them. I would say, I
Wow.
think we should see this show. And I would go in and buy them tickets and they'd pay me back. And then we'd go. But I mean, I think it's mostly because I had 5 brothers and sisters. So if they started taking me to the theater, then my brother would want to go to ball games, and then my sister would want to go to ballet, and and then what do you got? You
Uh-huh.
got chaos on your hands. So
Exactly.
I
Yeah.
had to fend for myself, but thank goodness I had the wherewithal, because I actually have some other friends I've made who also grew up on Long Island at the same time with me and went into show business, and they were like, "Why didn't I think of that? Why, it was there. It was available to me. How did you
Uh-huh.
figure that out?" And I have no answer for that.
No. It's funny about talking about people just getting the autographs to sell them on eBay. I have a friend that's an actor, and he told me one time, he said, when they come through the autograph line and they don't want it personalized, it's going to end up on eBay.
I see. And
Yeah.
people come with, with posters from other shows they were in,
Uh-huh.
albums, merchandise that they can sell. It's not
Yeah.
right.
No. Yep.
But I was just very blessed. I lived in a more innocent time. I lived in
Uh-huh.
a more dangerous time, though. Times Square in 1970.
That
Go
was,
watch
yeah.
Midnight Cowboy if you want to know what it was like. I mean, people used to say to my mother, why you're letting him go in by himself? Aren't you worried? She's like, worried about what? That was my mother was just not a worrier. She lived till
No,
95, so that'll tell you something. Don't
no.
worry, and you can live a long life.
I'm going to have to take that to heart.
Yeah, yeah. But I really think that anybody who has an interest in theater will really enjoy The Show Goes On, because it's 400 pages of just story after story after story, many of which I was able to extract from the individuals I interviewed. I interviewed over 100 people who are still currently working in the theater, and
Wow.
got their just absolutely fascinating tales. And I had to cut back. I mean, I could have written a 600-page book, but because nothing should ever go to waste, I turn those into columns that I write, because I'm also a very prodigious blogger, and I like to
Uh-huh.
write about the theater. I have a column called Theater Yesterday and Today, and that's a mix of my reviews of current shows, but also theater history as well, which I love. I explore. I can explore theater history. All these books behind me are mine. It's quite a library. And I was able to write The Show Goes On over a 2.5-year period, really not having to leave my apartment very much. We do have a fantastic library here in Manhattan at Lincoln Center that specializes in theater, and you can go there and really dig deep. And I did have to do that on occasion, but
Mhm.
for the most part, it's amazing what everything here and then everything online allows me to do. We live in quite amazing times for all of that.
We do. Before we would have to just do all kinds of traveling and going
Absolutely.
actually to a library or to microfilm or whatever
But
to
I,
get
but
the
I do like
information.
going to the library because it keeps me away from my kitchen. Because
Ah,
any writer will tell you the greatest enemy is snacking. So
snacking, yes, or anything else that distracts you from the writing.
yes, and it's always like, oh, that was a good paragraph. I'm going to go celebrate and have a cookie, when you're up.
That's right.
You know,
If I write 500 words, I get two cookies.
yeah, exactly. And when you're at the library, there's like no windows, there's no food, and
Yep,
and you work for hours and hours, and the time just flies. There's no
it
clock on the
does.
wall. Yeah.
Libraries are very underrated, I think, and
Oh, I've loved
especially
libraries since I was a little kid. Were like just a candy store for me.
same. Our library, we have great libraries here and amazing librarians. And they just, I remember from the time I was a child, going to the library was just such a treat to get to do. And I still, when I go in the library, feel the same way I did
Yeah.
then, now. Was there anything about, did anything surprise you? Did you haven't find out any surprises or anything when you wrote the book and when you were doing your research? And
Well, yeah, because somebody would casually mention to me, "Well, you're going to tell the Robert Burr story," and I'm like, "What's the Robert Burr story?"
hmm,
And then I start digging up the Robert Burr story, and I'm so fascinated by it. I'm telling a bunch of friends of mine at our monthly lunch that we have, where we meet up, and we're all theater rats, and we tell stories. And I said, "I've got this amazing story about the actor Robert Burr," and one of my friends went, "Wait a minute, I know his daughter, Betsy." So he
oh,
put me in touch with Betsy, and she really filled in. And very briefly, the Robert Burr story is that in 1964, Richard Burton was on Broadway playing Hamlet. And this was the height of not only his fame, but the height of the Elizabeth Taylor Richard Burton marriage. They had just gotten married. Cleopatra was released in 63. This was 64. They both shed their husbands and wives, and this was the most scandalous, relationship.
right.
And he starred on Broadway in Hamlet, and I mean, you could not get a ticket. The mobs, the police, the crowd control was just absolutely unlike anything you've ever seen. And there was an actor in the show named Robert Burr who played a small part in Hamlet and also was understudy to Richard Burton. Well, now you might think, well, gee, he's going to go on because Richard Burton was such a carouser and a drinker. Well, guess what? Richard Burton, for all his carousing, never missed. He was just dedicated and just he could always show up on time, no matter how hungover he was, or maybe even imbibed during the show. But he never missed until one Wednesday afternoon when Robert Burr got a call. You're going on this afternoon. And he was ready. And the wonderful story that I got from his daughter, Betsy, was that she'll never forget. She was in her classroom in school, and all of a sudden her mother comes into the room and she pulls her out in the hall and thinking the worst, that it's a family tragedy. Instead, she went,
Mhm.
"Daddy's going to play Hamlet. Come on." And she grabbed all the kids. There were like 3 or 4 kids. She had to grab them out of the different schools. And they all went to see Daddy play Hamlet. That's not the end of the story. Though it ended in triumph, he performed the Wednesday matinee, Wednesday evening. By Thursday, he was back playing Bernardo, small part in
Mhm.
Hamlet. Life of an actor. But 2 weeks later, he gets a phone call from Joseph Papp. Joseph Papp ran the downtown public theater in New York City, which was Shakespeare in the Park and all these great cutting edge programs. Joe Papp was one of the greatest theater producers of his time. And Robert Burr is sitting home one afternoon, like 2 weeks after he went on for Burton. The phone rings and he goes, "Hello." And a voice on the other end of the phone says, "Is this Robert Burr? This is Joe Papp. I just opened a Hamlet last night in Central Park." And Robert Burr says, "Well, of course, we all know we have competing Hamlets in New York." He goes, "My Hamlet is sick. The understudy doesn't know the part. If I can get permission for you to get out of the show tonight, can you come over and play Hamlet?" Now, this guy, okay, has got to rush across town, meet actors he's never met before, play in one of the great dramas in world theater with someone playing his mother he's never met, someone playing his sister he's never met, someone playing the uncle he's never met. Plus, no two Hamlets are ever the same. They're all cut and adapted. I don't know how he did it. I truly don't know how he did it. Plus, the Hamlet production was on what you call a proscenium arch flat, and in Central Park, the theater's on three quarters like this. I mean, I just don't know how the man did it. And he had practically no rehearsal because he had to do a matinee of Hamlet that afternoon. And he had to rush to the theater. He got there about 5 p.m. and the show went up about 8 p.m. And he had just, that's the amount of time he had to prepare to play Hamlet in,
Wow.
in front of, 2,000 people. So, and the best part is that he did the part for about 2 weeks, and the Hamlet got better, and called Joe Papp and said, "Well, I'm ready to return to the show." And Joe Papp said, "Yeah, we like this guy. We like this. We like this
So he
Robert."
took the part.
It's just great. And again, I think that's just so heroic. And there's a lot of things I'm leaving out, little parts of the story his daughter filled in for me, just fabulous. And I love to go back and read old newspapers. And one of the best accounts of what happened was in a New Jersey paper, because he lived in New Jersey, and the locals were just like, they just wanted to get this story out about how he accomplished this. And I loved reading all of that. I mean, research is just so much. If you like research, and you want to do what I do, which is tell theater history, I mean, there's just nothing better. There's nothing better. My friend Winnie Holtzman, who wrote Wicked, I always quote her because she says, "Oh, I love research because it's not writing." Because the blank page is the blank page.
But yes,
Research, my gosh, you can just have a blast.
I'll research all day.
That's right. That's right.
Is that your favorite story from the book, or do you have a favorite, another story
I
that's been?
love that one. And I will tell you something. I really didn't know how to end the book. I thought, well, what's
Mm-hmm.
the story that will end the book? And one day it hit me, because I do tell a lot of stories about people who are fired. Well,
Mm.
almost every actor has a firing story, and mine is a doozy. So I close the book with my own story, and people have really responded to it because it just brings the whole thing to on a personal level at the very end of the book. And
Mm-hmm.
I put myself I filter myself throughout the book, because after all, I've been going to the theater for 55 years, so I have a lot of experience. Why wouldn't I put that in the book? Why would I leave that out? And again, I don't know how to write anything that's cut and dried. And then they did this, and then they did this, then they did this, then they did that.
Mm-hmm.
That's so boring. I have to put my own opinions, feelings, because after all, I was there.
Exactly. And people like that personal touch too. That
Absolutely. My first book, Up in the Cheap Seats, the subtitle is A Historical Memoir of Broadway.
oh,
And I
and
love
that's
that.
the one I have.
That's
My
it.
first.
And that's what I love about
Yep.
it, because it's different from most memoirs, because
Mm-hmm.
yes, it's the story of this little boy as he goes to see all these great shows, but then it's also filled with theater history. And again, I interviewed 100 people for that book. And how grateful am I? I wrote that book about 10 years ago,
Mm-hmm.
and I got to interview Stephen Sondheim, Mike Nichols, Harold Prince. They're all gone now.
Yeah.
I was able to sit with them and talk to them before they left us. And
Yeah.
even this book, already since I've started, we've lost one or two people. So yeah,
Mm.
you got to get this stuff written down. It's for the ages.
History is very important to have and to keep a record of, for
Yeah, I
sure.
love I love oral histories. I love reading books that
Mhm.
are oral histories. They're great.
Me too. That's like one of my favorite things to do is to talk to somebody about their history and like, listen to like where they may have come from and the obstacles they may have, overcome or still trying to overcome and, get it written down for them so that it doesn't just disappear.
Yeah, and of course, I'm like most people. I wished I'd done it with my grandparents. I didn't.
Yes.
Yeah. For anybody
Yes.
listening or watching, go sit with your parents or grandparents with a tape
Mhm.
recorder and just start getting the stories down. Because once they're gone,
Right.
and you won't get the stories.
And I'd found a book several years ago, and it was a book for somebody that wanted to capture their family history. If you did like you didn't know where to get started, but it like broke it down in sections, and it would be like things you could ask, your grandma, and it would be about how she grew up, and it was just like
Right.
chapters of like to get you started in the interview process.
Fantastic idea.
And I'm really wishing I'd bought that because I still have my mother. My father passed away several years ago, but that is one of my biggest regrets, is that I didn't get more of his family history. And you know, um, he was a bus driver for Trailways, so he drove all over the country. So I'm sure he had a ton of good stories.
Absolutely.
And probably as a little kid, I wasn't old enough to hear. As an
Right.
adult,
Right. Censored.
yeah, censored. Had to bleep it. He had to bleep himself a lot, probably. Are you working on anything else now, like any other kind of book or?
Well, right now, this is just about to turn April, and the Tony Awards deadline is at the end of the month. So
Mhm.
I go to the theater every night because they're opening 18 Broadway shows between mid
Oh
March
wow.
and the end of April. Yeah, and also there's off Broadway and things like that. So I'm very busy, but I always have time to write and do some history. And yeah, I want to write a book on theater successes and disasters of Broadway shows on the road, because
Oh.
there are great stories about shows that open out of town to great reviews, open on Broadway and flop. Shows
Hmm.
that open out of town to terrible reviews, and then they fix it. And by the time it comes to Broadway, it's a smash.
Smash hit.
There are shows that start their run on Broadway, which we call previews, usually a week or two to iron out the kinks, and then they have their opening night. There are actually some shows, they're quite notorious. They had their previews, they had paying customers, the marquee was up, the pictures were in front of the theater. The producers pull the plug, euthanize those shows, would not show them to the critics. And those shows, they're such spectacular flops. It makes you wonder, were they high? Like, what were they thinking when they wanted to produce a musical about Senator Joe McCarthy?
Yeah,
That ran two performances.
two
So these,
performances.
so they never faced the critics. These shows never faced the critics. One of them was everybody thought was going to be the hit of the season. It had like a $2 million advance sale in 1966. $2 million was a lot of money in 1966.
Hmm.
And it was going to be a musical version of Breakfast at Tiffany's.
Oh,
Not a terrible idea.
yeah.
The stars were Mary Tyler Moore, post the Dick Van Dyke Show, pre the Mary Tyler Moore Show,
Hmm.
and Chamberlain, who was the star of Dr. Kildare. These were
Yes.
the biggest television stars in the 1960s, big Broadway musical, and it opened out of town, terrible reviews, moved to another city, terrible reviews, came to Broadway, did a few previews, and the producer just went, I'm not letting the critics see this. I'm returning the $2 million.
Wow.
And he just said, and he always referred, he said, that musical was by Bay of Pigs.
Oh
So
my
that'll be a
gosh.
great story to tell.
That'll be a good one.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, when you said that about, all the releases here and stuff, is it before the Tony Awards because they're trying to get them released before the Tony Awards so that they have a shot at getting nominated? I
Yes,
wasn't
and
sure how
also
that. Okay.
there's a certain theory that if you open early in the season, you have to wait and maybe struggle through some bad weeks at the box office because hopefully maybe we'll be nominated for Tony's and then maybe we'll win and then maybe. And what happens is the Tony Award nominations are announced, the show doesn't get any or gets too few, and they close. They close before the Tony Awards. Or shows that hold on and struggle until the Tony Awards because we're up for Best Musical, but we lose, and then you close the week after the Tony Awards. I mean, it
Mm.
happens all the time. So there's also this crunch to like be, last in, most remembered. It's like that
Hmm.
with the Oscars. They
Yeah.
flood cinemas in November and December. If you open in February, your chances for an Oscar, they're like distant past. Oh, did that even open this year? People's memories
Yeah.
are so short. So
I
yeah,
don't remember that movie. Yeah.
yeah. So it's a
That's, yeah.
big rush to There's always exceptions to those rules, but
Right.
but
It's a
yeah,
strategy.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this year's Oscar winner, Nora, that opened in the summer, so it wasn't a late entry. Uh,
Hmm.
so yeah, so a very busy time, and there is some burnout. I'll be honest with you. You go to a Broadway show every single night,
Hmm.
and especially if you sit through one or two really bad ones.
Mm. Hopefully, you won't have to do too much of that.
No, no. And I always wish for a transcendent experience. I want
Absolutely.
that show to
Because
be
like
great.
because like you said, we don't like to write bad reviews.
Let us pray.
Yes, I do book reviews, and I'm 100% in agreement with you. I do not like to do a bad book review because, yeah, they can make or break, and I don't like making
There's
anyone's.
there But is there anything more frustrating when someone says, you have to read this book? It's so good. The first 200 pages are kind of slow. It's like, I don't have the time. I mean, I cannot go through 200 pages that aren't that great in order to get the
Right.
jewel coming towards the end,
Exactly.
you got to grab me. You got to grab me early on.
Yeah. I have to be
Call me
hooked from the
Ishmael,
very
give
beginning.
me a
Yes.
first great line.
Yeah.
Hook me.
I like books to drop me just right in, like from the very first chapter, just drop me right into the drama. Just, put me right there in the middle of the murder scene or
Yeah,
the
absolutely.
kidnapping or the mystery or whatever's happening. I just pick me up and drop me on the first page. And
It's a
that's what
current it's a current trend with television. If you watch a lot of television, as I do, and you
I,
watch a series or a Hulu series, very often it'll open with a spectacular sequence, and then a little cryon will come up and it'll go 2 days earlier.
2 days earlier, or
Yeah, and
yeah.
then so instead of starting in the traditional way, building up to that big scene, they throw that
Mhm.
scene at you, grab you, and then you go back.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
very
because
fun.
you'll be like, "What are they doing?" And then all of a sudden,
Yeah,
it's like you think, "Oh, this is something." Now when we get towards the end, we're going to know work
yeah,
back
but
up
if
to
it's good
this scene.
storytelling, sometimes you'll even forget. I go, oh, we still got that scene coming up where the thing went off in the bomb, and yeah,
Yeah, yeah, they do that sometimes, and they'll plant little seeds, and then it'll be like when they reveal it again, you'll be like, "Oh, I totally forgot that he said that guy was,
exactly.
hiding somewhere or doing something or whatever." So yeah, but so what do you like to read when you can just sit down and read a book?
Well, I'm a big fan, obviously, of books about theater and film and television because I love it
Hmm.
and I read about it. I love biography. I'm reading a I'm reading
Same.
an 800-page biography of the great film actress Barbara Stanwyck, and it
Oh,
only takes you up to half of her career. It
oh
was written
wow.
it was written 10 years ago, and the new one is going to come out next year, the second one. And
Uh-huh.
I said, wow, I was reading about volume two and I went, but I've never read volume one. So I'm reading that right now. And it's extremely well written. And she led a fascinating life.
I
So
can
I'm
imagine.
reading that.
She
Yeah.
was, yeah. I
Great actor.
always loved to watch her in anything that she was in. She
She had
just
a
commanded the screen.
she had a
Just
horrible childhood, she was an orphan. She
mm,
was very poor and shuttled back and forth with families and ripped apart from
mm,
her siblings and a very tough, hard life. She was
yeah.
born Ruby Stevens.
Ruby
Perfect,
Stevens
perfectly good name for a movie star, but they turned her into Barbara Stanwyck.
turned her to, yeah.
Yeah.
Wow, that's so. Let me ask you this, and my listeners love to get the answer to this question. If you could choose three people from your book to invite over for a dinner party, who would they
Oh,
be and why?
oh wow. Dead or alive, or they have to be alive?
Yeah, no, it could be anybody from your books. Anybody from your
Oh,
book. Yeah, three
wow.
people.
Wow.
Yep.
Well, this is the same question as who would you like to sit next to on a flight to Australia? Who
Mhm.
would like to sit next to for like 20 hours? And
Yeah,
I actually had that dream come true, even though it wasn't on an airplane. The
yeah.
great theater and movie director Mike Nichols uh,
Mm,
was an idol of mine, and he's one of the great raconteurs, storytellers, and he's kind of like the Zelig of show business. I mean, he knew everybody,
mhm.
and always wanted to be in a room with him, and I got that chance.
Oh,
I
wow.
worked on one of his movies, and we got to know each other a bit. And then when I was writing my first book, I got permission to go visit him, and I sat in his apartment for an hour and interviewed him. And he'd be absolutely one of my dinner companions.
Mhm.
Absolutely. I would have to say Robert Preston because of my lifelong hero worship. Uh,
Right.
I don't know if you've ever had this experience, but I had one dream in my life where he and I were friends. Like the only thing I remember about the dream is we were at a dinner and we were talking very like two great
Mhm.
friends over dinner. And when I woke up, it felt like it had really happened. But of course, he'd been dead for like 15 years. But it was so real. Like I felt like it should have happened. And it never did. I met him once, but we never had that connection.
Right.
Uh, and for the third person, because I think we need a little female energy in there. I think one of the women who I've most admired, and it's maybe a strange mix with Mike Nichols and Robert Preston, but I just have a thing for Ruth Bader Ginsburg. I imagine that she would have been just an extraordinary person to sit and just get that mind going and the way she saw the world.
I agree. She would have been, yeah,
I
definitely
think we could
someone
have
to
had.
talk.
I think we could have had a lot of fun. Ruth and Mike and Bob and me. I think we
Yeah,
could
yeah.
have a good night.
That would have been a very good dinner.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
So, any plans to continue acting, or are you just going to stay in recovery? And
Yeah, I mean, I put more than 35 years into my acting career. I did almost everything I wanted to do. I
mm,
uh, I worked on television. I had a television series or two. I did cartoons. I did radio commercials. I did
mhm,
many television commercials. I did musicals. I did drama. I did almost everything. I understudied on Broadway, but I never performed on Broadway, which was always the ultimate goal. It's so
mhm,
funny that was what I wanted to do with my career more than anything else. But what happened was I got sidelined. I went out to California to do something, and the business was very kind to me. And I thought, well, I should stay here. And I thought, well, if I become famous enough on television, I'll be welcome back to Broadway. That's what they do all the time, bring
mhm,
television stars to Broadway. But it didn't work out that way. It didn't. And I was always writing. While I lived in LA for 30 years, I wrote for television. I wrote an episode of Murphy Brown. I wrote a
mhm.
television movie for Lifetime. I wrote movies that sold, even though they didn't get made. And I made some good money as a writer. But when I moved back to New York about 10 years ago, I realized I didn't want to act anymore, that I wanted to write. I wanted to make that my full-time profession. And I've never been happier. And there's really kind of no looking back. Now,
Mhm.
my agents will call me from time to time with an audition. And I turn a lot of them down unless it's something interesting. Like
Mhm.
there was a chance recently to play a part on a new TV series that's going to be Tina Fey and Steve Carell. I'm like, well,
Oh, you
you want
got
to
to do
work
that.
with
Yeah,
them, right? The
yeah.
the part, by the way, was old pharmacist. That was the part. And I said to my agent, even though I'm 68 years old, I'm not old. I still don't look old enough. I have a
Yeah.
very full demeanor. I know when I watch this show that it's going to be an old pharmacist. I got a
Yeah.
call. I got a call, but they were interested. I met the director. We chatted on Zoom, of course. Uh, but
Mhm.
I I've nurtured a lot of young people, and maybe at some point someone will call and say, "Hey, I want you in this movie." I won't even have to audition. That I want you in this, and I'll do it. Hey, my daughter is a director. My daughter just had a movie premiere on
Oh, wow.
Amazon. Yeah, it's called My Fault London, and it's on Amazon Prime if you get it.
Yep.
And it's an action movie. It's basically Fast and the Furious meets Fight Club, and
Oh,
it
wow.
over with a feather. My daughter is directing, chase scenes in a garage with cars. It just blows my mind. Blows my mind.
That's
Yeah,
amazing. Good
very
for
profound.
her. Good
Yeah.
for
So
her.
maybe, hey, Dad, you want to play a
She'll
part in
throw
this?
dad apart. Hey, dad, come over
But
and
never say never. And who knows? Maybe I will be on Broadway before, I go live in the old actors' home in New Jersey. It's
yeah.
possible. Yep.
Fingers crossed. I hope you get to do it.
But
That
you
would be
were you were
amazing.
a fan of Alien Nation, my old show,
Yes, watched
and
it, when it was originally on.
and then
Um,
the other show you mentioned, Voyager, Star Trek
Voyager.
Voyager.
Yep,
Yeah,
yep. I'm a huge Trekkie.
that was a 4 hour makeup job, 4.5 hours. Uh,
Wow.
but I only did one episode. And they were introducing a whole new race of people. I was a Vardwar, the
Mm-hmm.
Vardwar race. So
Barbed wire. Yeah.
we had like these gills, and it was quite elaborate.
Four
But
hours. Whew, that's a
yeah,
long.
yeah, you get there at 4 o'clock in the morning, and by 8 o'clock, 8:30, you're able to go to the set.
Yeah. And on Alienation, you just got to wear cool suits and suspenders
Oh, I
and
was so lucky. Alien Nation, half the
yeah,
cast in those elaborate makeup. So when we
yeah,
would, at 11:30 at night, when they'd say, "Okay, that's a wrap, we're going home," they had to sit for an hour to get that. You couldn't just rip that stuff off, or you rip your skin
yeah,
off. So you had to have
yeah,
it fully removed, and I could just, go home with my makeup still on.
yeah. I heard Michelle and Terry talk about like you could lift it up in the back, the headpiece up in the back, and the water would just pour out from like
It's the
where
truth.
they had been sweating and stuff.
Sweating
And I was
for
like, oh
hours.
gosh.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they've been in the makeup for hours. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, Eric writes too, doesn't he?
Yes,
Eric
he does.
Pierpoint.
He
Yeah.
does some novels. Yeah. And Terry Treese, I'm going to see on Monday, or is it next Monday? Oh, this Monday. I'm having dinner with her. She's coming to New York City. I'm
Oh,
gonna.
please tell her I said hello. Kathy was my favorite character. So
Oh, I will
I
absolutely.
love Kathy. Kathy and Matt. They were my,
Yeah,
the couple you cheered for and wanted to be together. And,
yeah.
the,
It was great fun. Great fun. I had a
yeah.
great. Yeah.
And Jeffrey Marcus, he's so nice and
Well,
amazing.
Jeffrey Marcus was one of my best friends before we did Alienation.
Oh, yeah. Didn't you all live in the same
Well,
building?
there's that. But here's what happened. Kenneth Johnson, who created Alienation,
Hmm.
did a TV movie in 1981, which was 7 years earlier. And it was filmed here in Manhattan. It was called Senior Trip. And it was about a
Yes.
bunch of high school students from Youngstown, Ohio, who come to New York City for their big adventures. And Jeffrey Marcus had a leading part, and I had a leading part. I played the class clown who wanted to be a Broadway star, typecasting. And my best friend was Liz Calloway, who's now a big Broadway star, Tony Award nominee, one of the best singers around.
Hmm.
And our little funny bit during Senior Trip was we went to see Sugar Babies and went backstage to meet Mickey Rooney, and Mickey Rooney played himself in the movie.
Oh,
So
wow.
acted with Mickey Rooney. But Jeff was in that movie, and we became best friends. And then 7 years later, we're cast on Alienation together. And
Hmm.
then he needed a place to live in LA, and he got the apartment below me. We lived upstairs and downstairs from each
Oh,
other
wow.
in a duplex.
Yeah.
So
You
yeah,
two had such great chemistry on the show too, that back and forth. Like Grazer was always giving, Albert a hard time. And
it was so much fun. It was
yeah.
too much fun. I do miss that. When you're on a television series, it's a heady trip. I mean,
Hmm.
it's the best. You wonder why people do a show for 7, 8, 9 years. I mean, besides a steady paycheck, it's
Yeah.
it, it's a as most people try to imagine, what an office to go to every week.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So tell me, where can our viewers find out more about your books and to read some
Yeah,
of your
the show goes
reviews?
on is available exclusively through my website. I'm not selling it on Amazon. They make enough money, thank you.
Yes.
I don't want to share my royalties with them.
Yep.
It's working out beautifully. It's glitch free. So all you have to do is just Google Ron Fassler and Google Show Goes On. You'll find me. But it's at ronfassler.org.
Okay.
Ronfassler.org. And you'll hit the button, just go to books, and it's really simple. And it's a great gift if you know anybody that loves theater. I got the best compliment the other day. A friend texted me and went, "Ron, your book is like candy." How? Come
What
on,
what what other reviews do you need?
yeah.
Yeah, that's perfect.
And more than one friend have said, "I'm doling it out to myself in little portions because I don't want it to end."
Yeah.
So
That's when you know a book's good, when somebody's like dreading getting to the end of it because they don't want the experience to be over.
right, right.
Yeah.
Oh, we ran out of stories. Oh no.
No, it's at the end. I don't want to read the last chapter because then
Exactly.
it'll be
Exactly.
over.
Yeah.
Well, Ron, I really do appreciate you being with me today.
Thank you.
Like I
This was a
said,
pleasure. It's great to share the screen with somebody who's asking intelligent questions and has done some research. And really, I just had a great time chatting.
I did too. You're amazing, and I really appreciate it. And I do thank you again for being here.
Thank you. Bye bye now.
All right. I wanted to thank everyone for watching, and I'll see you on the next episode.